I want to bring in a special perspective from the angle of an international development agency. So my contribution is from the angle of a UN body that has been supporting this process since it started, actually deriving from the experience of Latin America, particularly Porto Alegre, and as it has been spreading across the world. We in UN Habitat have been supporting this process. Now, I am coming in to share with you our experience from the angle of supporting an initiative of this nature. And I have named my presentation to be increasing citizen participation in revenue and expenditure planning. Later on, I will talk from the experience that has already been shared from yesterday to bring in the revenue angle as opposed, say, from the expenditure dimension of budgeting. And I'm doing this, again, for very special reasons, as I said, to bring in the African dimension, though I did hear a sister here from Mozambique also bringing in some experience from Africa. But I thought I can also emphasize on some of those dimensions. The whole perspective of UN Habitat on the subject of participatory budgeting derives from the whole process of how the development process as a whole is steered, is directed. So for us, the issue of participatory budgeting is situated in the whole process of planning, management, and governance. So it is a process, which is a total process. Then there is a second dimension for us in UN Habitat. This is the dimension of sustainable urban development. In the presentations from yesterday and this morning, the word sustainability has been used a number of times. And it is becoming more prominent now with climate change, with the global financial crisis, with poverty increasing. So there is this concept of sustainable urban development. How do we make our cities to be more sustainable? And we have attempted to draw a diagram which brings in 3 dimensions of sustainability. There is the dimension of ecology or environment, as we often look at it. But there is also the dimension of society, and there is the dimension of economy. Now, in all those elements, when they are put together, in order to deal with them, there is the issue of planning, where we make decisions, we propose priorities, and there is the aspect of management, where we organize our activities on a day-to-day basis, and there is the aspect of governance, where relationships between actors, between institutions, between levels are taken into account. So for us, the whole process of participatory budgeting is situated within this aspect of managing development in a sustainable way, in a 3-dimension way, whereby we bring all processes together. And in that respect, for UN Habitat, this whole aspect of governance, as I think it has been illustrated by mayors here and actors, is a recognition that wherever we are, there are a number of spheres, actors. There is the public sector, there is the local government, but you can include also the central government. That is the public sphere at the top. There is also the private sector. There is the civil society. You and me, either in our churches, in our neighborhoods, in our associations. Now, these three spheres, the public sphere, the private sphere, the civil society, these are actually the drivers of society. For a long time, we had assumed that society is led by the state, by the public sphere only. But increasingly, and this is important for developing countries particularly, that the private sector has a role. The civil society has a role. Now, what this triangle shows, how do we make these spheres to work together? What are the processes? What are the instruments that we can make them work together? And here we have listed from our end a number of tools that we in UN Habitat are developing in order to ensure this relationship. And as you can see at the left-hand side of yours, participatory budgeting is one of those tools that enables these linkages among various spheres. The whole point for us is to ensure that this participation, this linkage, is not a token, it's not a fiction. We are not hoodwinking, fooling people. Rather, it has to be effective and meaningful interlinkage. And here then, we are just showing the kind of tools that we in UN Habitat broadly have been trying to develop. This is an illustration of the origins of this document, which will be talked about in the next few minutes, on participatory budgeting. There was a concept, and then there is a document, but this one I will leave to Eve later on to elaborate. But we have also, because of that broad triangle, developed other instruments. Instrument, for example, here we are showing how do you build the necessary leadership at the local level to allow that linkages. We are calling it building bridges between various actors. And we have various aspects here of dealing with conflicts, dealing with planning, and these are tools that we develop and use in allowing for that process to take place. This is another illustration of the tools we use in terms of how do you promote local economic development. It may not be easy for an audience in Portugal or Spain to understand the challenges in developing countries of how do you stimulate local economic development so that those actors of the public sector, the private sector, the single mother somewhere can be part of this broader process. So this is another series of intervention on issues of local economic development. This is another tool of how do you promote participatory urban decision-making in a number of areas. This is a tool that we had developed several years ago, which lists here among the tools as participatory budgeting. Now, let me now move in history. In the context of Africa and in a number of developing countries, there is an opportunity that is arising. One is the opportunity of reforms. A number of developing countries are going through a reform process. Reform in the economic arena, reform in the political processes, and reforms in terms of social relationships. There is also, particularly in this historical period, the early phase of the 21st century, new relationships are emerging between these three spheres, the civil society, the government, and the private sector. There are also, in a number of developing countries, programs, national programs and national strategies that are being built. And at the global level, the international community has taken up new commitments like the Millennium Development Goals.